we got to talk about Podcast P, because there was a debate here in our studio whether or not this was a real story. We do not want to get sentelled around here like my man Colin Cowherd did a couple days ago. By the way, Cowherd, he said on the show, he was like, yeah, I heard a report that you can't wear Luka Doncic jerseys in Dallas, but that was a Sentell story. So, yeah, I love me some Colin, so I'm just saying. But, yeah, Podcast P, he said that he is going to take a break, that he is going to be taking a break from his podcast. The Sixers, they're in the middle of a terrible season. They're 20-37. They're on the outside looking in a play-in tournament in the Eastern Conference. The Sixers were a team that was expected to compete for not just the Eastern Conference Finals and to come out of the NBA Finals. They were looked at as a championship contender with Embiid and Paul George and Maxey, but that just has not been the case. The Sixers, they're 2.5 games back on the final play-in spot in the East. Now, there is still a shot they can get into the playoffs if you finish strong. Well, Paul George thinks they can finish strong. Paul George, he is saying that he's going to take a break from his podcast in order to get his body right to help the Sixers get going. Here, play this clip. Here's Paul George talking about load managing his podcast.
Fellas, it's no secret. This season is up to this point, man. It hasn't been what we envisioned. I know my goal when I first signed with Philadelphia was to bring a championship to these amazing fans here. I still remain positive about that, and that is still the case and where I'm coming from. With that being said, though, I want to let the Podcast P family know that after today's episode with Dwight, I plan to take a break from the pod just to focus on getting my body right, getting mentally right, and, help this squad make a push towards our goal to finish the season out, give ourselves a chance to be in contentions to compete for a championship. I won't front. The desire to get back to shooting in person with my guys as well is the forefront of, this hiatus as well. I look forward to us three being back together and doing this as we once started this.
I just love that he waited until the Sixers were 20-37 to say this. I mean, he's got to be the most tone-deaf athlete podcaster that we've ever seen. First, Podcast P was bored, and now after 57 games, 17 games under 500, he finally decides, hey, maybe I should focus on my actual job, the job that I'm getting paid for, the $211 million contract I signed. Maybe I should stay in the gym and out of the podcast studio. So yeah, it's great to see that you're finally doing this. The truth is, though, this is a lesson to a lot of athletes that are podcasters, because Mookie Betts, I think he showed the world how to do it, right? You go on the road, you do one interview, you do with another player from another team, and then you do one the next week. But if Mookie was on a Dodgers team that was 10 games under 500, he was hitting 200, I guarantee you he would not be doing that podcast. Okay. So that's the tricky thing for these podcasters that are athletes is, hey, you set yourself up for criticism. I mean, hey, just imagine if we had a chat like this for Paul George's show. And here's the thing. I think Paul George actually has a pretty damn good podcast when he has guys on there. I think it's cool to see that side of him. But unfortunately, if you're not playing in the games, no one's going to want to hear anything you have to say about the podcast, unless it's your injury report or something like that. But Noel, I know you're a fan of Paul George's podcast, right? But
yeah, I think he kind of started this new wave that we've seen a lot of NBA players and just athletes in general start their podcast after him. So I'm definitely a big fan of his podcast.
And do you think that this is smart for him to do, or would you say, F it, let's keep doing it?
I mean, I'm kind of I see both sides just because, like you said, it's been so long into the season already, and we've seen that this fit hasn't necessarily worked out too well. I was kind of skeptical of it at first when he signed that big contract, but I kind of look at it like maybe he shouldn't be playing in games right now. Maybe he should sit out the season with Embiid and just continue doing your podcast.
And then you get that draft pick.
You get that draft pick. You have Jeremy McCain coming back from injury. You have Tyrese Maxey still really young. And then you go all in on next year, and both of you guys get healthy. They're not going to win a title. They might make the play-in tournament if everything goes well. Even that, there might be a bit of a stretch with teams like the Pistons and other teams in the East kind of coming up. But yeah, it's an interesting spot, man, because even last year you saw the reception on his podcast was always a little interesting because he makes great content. He has great guests, but sometimes just the way he would talk about certain things, fans wouldn't like it. Even the shade he was throwing at the Clippers after he chose Simon Philly on his podcast was a little weird.
Some athletes you just like hate on for no reason.
Yeah.
Like Paul George does not deserve the hate he gets, but there's something about him. He's just like a little cringe.
He always ruins the relationship with the city after he leaves. So he doesn't really have anywhere he can go back to where he necessarily like loves. Maybe OKC.
But I do think though this was a bad decision for him to make. And I'll tell you why. Because now this sets a precedent. He should have said, F it. I'm doing this podcast and we'll just talk about how bad I am.
Yeah.
We'll talk about how bad this team is. Like if there was anyone like on the Lakers that had a podcast that were talking about the team, like we would all tune in, right? I mean, it's interesting insight, and you got to take the good with the bad, right? It should be the journey of an NBA season. So I think that this is bad just because it really like sets a precedent, and it's happening so late too.
Yeah.
When they're basically out of contention. But Paul George, man, I don't like this move.
Yeah, I think by the end of March, he'll probably be ruled out for the season and resume the podcast. It'll be like a 3-4 week break, and he'll be back.
I think it's utterly ridiculous that he's going to stop podcasting. I feel like stay 10 toes down with it, man. You already been this far.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, I'll be talking about preparing for the next season, you and Embiid getting healthy. And listen, the Philadelphia 76ers, they're not out of the Cooper Flag, Dylan Harper sweepstakes. So if I'm them, I got my sights set on that. I get two, in my opinion, who are elite young talents, and then you can pair them with Maxey, Paul George, and Joel Embiid. And to me, it seems like a better fit. I understand that maybe the peer pressure of like NBA media and fans always talking about your podcast. I mean, I did see that stat. He has more podcast clips out than field goals made,
my God, that's
which was
true.
hard to see. But at the same time, I mean, who are media members how are we to tell you can't go on a podcast because you play in the games? I can't go out there and do what you do. I can't go out there and get a bucket.
I just don't care one way or the other, right? I mean, like if you're going to quit your podcast for now, the Sixers pretty much already quit at basketball this season. I mean, it is what it is. But I think for Paul George's sake, I mean, Philly is not a city that you want to come off as like, okay, we're not giving 110%, right? I mean, Philly is that city that's going to hold you accountable, and they already feel like he finessed them, and they're not happy about this contract. He's lucky this isn't 2011. You can amnesty stuff, right? I mean, he'd definitely be a candidate for that, but Paul George is always just like, it's like if there's like two buttons to push, he's gonna push the wrong one as far as like the optics and as far as like taking care of stuff. Okay,